During his first term, President Trump proved that the president, on his own authority, can secure our borders. President Biden proved that a president determined to undermine and make a mockery of our immigration laws can willfully open those borders to the most violent criminals and terrorists and gangs and cartels on this planet and use the Democrats' sanctuary laws to protect them. This national nightmare will end at noon on Inauguration Day. But what of future presidents? The Laken-Riley Act would require ICE detention for illegal aliens who are charged with, arrested for, or convicted of any burglary, theft, larceny, or shoplifting offense. H.R. 29 further requires the Department of Homeland Security to issue a detainer for those illegal aliens and take custody of them effectively and expeditiously. It would also allow states to bring a civil action against derelict federal officials who refuse to enforce these laws. Joe Biden and Alejandro Mayorkas, I'm looking at you.
Under this bill, a person who's lived in the United States for decades, say for most of her life, paid taxes and bought a home, but who was mistakenly arrested for shoplifting, would not be freed to resume her life, but rather would be detained and deported even if the charges are dropped and even if the police admit that the arrest was mistaken. Consider a young dreamer or TPS recipient who's with a group of friends after school and someone in the group shoplifts, stealing a candy bar. To scare the whole group straight, everyone's arrested, whether they were involved in the shoplifting or not. But nobody is charged, and the charges are dropped. For most of the kids, it's a humiliating afternoon and a valuable life lesson. But for one of them, a young person who's been in America lawfully for years with his or her family, the consequences would be devastating under this legislation. Mandatory detention and deportation from the country just for having been arrested, even if never charged. It seems to me passing strange, Mr. Speaker, that our friends are taking this position when they do not even believe that the criminal justice system can be trusted when a jury unanimously convicts someone who's had the best legal representation money can buy in the state of New York on 34 different felony criminal counts after an extended criminal trial with all due process protections, including cross-examination and the right to counsel being afforded. If the criminal justice process cannot be trusted to identify a truly guilty person, even when that person has been arrested, charged, indicted, prosecuted, represented at every stage, given an opportunity to cross-examine all witnesses and to testify personally, and then is unanimously convicted by a jury of his peers beyond a reasonable doubt, how can the criminal justice process be trusted to identify a truly guilty person just with an arrest and no indictment, no prosecution, no cross-examination, no neutral adjudication by an impartial judge, no fact-finding, and no criminal conviction by a 12-person jury beyond a reasonable doubt?
What's up, everybody? Major Retired Richard Ojeda here, and Laken-Riley's death is a tragedy, and her family deserves all of the support, compassion, and justice that we can give. What happened to her is heartbreaking, and no one should ever have to endure the pain her family is going through. Let's be clear about that from the start. But we should be doing everything in our power to honor her memory and protect others from experiencing similar tragedies. But instead of addressing the systemic failures that led to this, some folks in Congress are using her name to push a hateful, fear-driven agenda. That's what the Laken-Riley bill is. Nothing more than a political stunt designed to scapegoat immigrants while ignoring the real issues. Jamie Raskin laid it out perfectly. He took Tom McClintock and the rest of these MAGA hypocrites to task, exposing their lies and fake outrage for what they are.
Mr. Speaker, the brutal murder of Laken-Riley was foreordained the day that Joe Biden took office and reversed the successful Trump policies that had finally secured our borders. Since that day, just 4 years ago, more than 7.8 million illegal aliens have been deliberately allowed into our country. The population the size of the state of Washington, our 13th largest state. Very little is done to vet these millions of illegal migrants. We don't know how many terrorists and violent criminals are among them, and worse, the Democrats don't seem to care.
their bill today is an empty and opportunistic measure. It's not like the compromise they tanked in the last Congress, a bill for greater border security, or for better technology in the ports of entry, or for expanding legal pathways to immigration and citizenship for millions of people, or for addressing huge immigrant visa backlogs. No. This bill would upend 28 years of mandatory immigration detention policy by requiring that any undocumented immigrant arrested for theft, larceny, or shoplifting be detained even if they are never convicted or even charged with a crime. This is a radical departure from current law, which since 1996 has generally required mandatory detention only for persons who are criminally convicted or who admit to having committed certain serious crimes. That is, when criminal guilt is certain and established beyond a reasonable doubt. Mandatory detention has always been reserved for people who are convicted of crimes and actually commit crimes. Expanding the detention requirement to include every person who's merely been accused of or arrested for, even if not charged for, shoplifting, for example, collapses the distinction between actual conviction on serious offenses versus simply being charged with or arrested for something very minor, even if the charges don't even lead anywhere.
McClintock and his crew claim this bill is about safety, but it's not. It's about fear. They want to distract you from their own failures, and they're using Laken Riley's tragedy as a smokescreen to do it. That's not just wrong, it's absolutely despicable. Let's not forget who Tom McClintock is. This guy has a long history of putting his political ambitions over the needs of his constituents. When California was burning and people were losing their homes to wildfires, McClintock wasn't fighting for federal resources to help his district. Nope. He was flying to Mar-a-Lago to cozy up to Donald Trump. While his constituents were in crisis, he was taking selfies with Trump and talking about tax cuts for billionaires. And now he wants to lecture us about public safety. Give me a break.
Like many of the immigration-related bills the GOP is now advancing, this one seems to follow a simple strategy. Pick a crime, paste into it a template immigration law covering convicted criminals, and then require detention or deportation of certain persons merely accused of committing the crime or arrested for committing the crime. No due process required at all. This allows us to get up and demonize immigrants without doing anything to fix the immigration system, and to act tough without actually making America safer or solving any of the problems within the immigration laws.
The Laken Riley bill isn't about keeping anyone safe. It allows immigrants to be detained or deported based on mere accusations. No convictions, no due process, just accusations. If someone is accused of shoplifting and never even charged, they could still be deported under this bill. That's not justice, that's profiling, and it's dangerous. This bill doesn't fix anything. It just feeds into the GOP's fear-mongering about immigrants. Meanwhile, they ignore the real issues that make communities unsafe. Take Ahmaud Arbery, for example. He was murdered in broad daylight while jogging in his own neighborhood. That wasn't an immigrant. It was homegrown hate. Where's the Republican outrage for that? Where's the legislation to tackle domestic terrorism and hate crimes? It doesn't exist because addressing those issues doesn't serve their agenda. They'd rather point fingers at immigrants and stir up fear than confront the uncomfortable truths about what's happening right here at home. And let's talk about the economy for a minute, because this is where their hypocrisy really shines. MAGA Republicans love to scream about immigrants taking jobs, but they conveniently ignore the scandals surrounding the H-1B visa program. You've got billionaires like Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy exploiting this system to hire cheaper labor while displacing American workers. Where's the outrage over that? It's nowhere, because the GOP doesn't actually care about protecting American jobs. They care about keeping their anti-immigrant rhetoric alive while letting their billionaire buddies manipulate the system for profit. And let's not forget Donald Trump's role in all of this. He promised to be tough on immigration, but under his watch, the H-1B visa program continues to thrive. He turned a blind eye while corporations abused the system, all while ranting about the southern border at his rallies. It's classic Trump. Create a problem, pretend to fix it, and screw over the working class in the process. The hypocrisy doesn't stop there. These same people love to wrap themselves in the Bible when it suits them. But where are their so-called Christian values when it comes to policies like family separation? Matthew 25 tells us to care for the least of these, the hungry, the sick, the stranger. But instead of helping the vulnerable, they're demonizing them. Instead of welcoming the stranger, they're locking them up and tearing families apart. There's nothing Christian about that. It's cruel, it's un-American, and it's a betrayal of the values they claim to stand for. Let's talk about family separation for a minute, because that's a stain on this country that we cannot ignore. Trump's zero-tolerance policy wasn't about enforcing the law. It was about inflicting pain. Over 5,500 children were ripped from their parents at the border. These were families fleeing unimaginable conditions, seeking asylum, and instead of offering them refuge, we traumatized them. And let's not forget the ProPublica audio, hearing children as young as 4 crying for their parents, Mama, Papa, while Border Patrol agents mocked them and called it an orchestra, is something I'll never forget. It was inhumane, and it was intentional. People like Stephen Miller and Jeff Sessions designed this policy to be as cruel as possible. They took a program meant to protect unaccompanied minors and twisted it into a weapon to punish families. They believed that if they made the process painful enough, it would deter others from coming. But here's the thing, it didn't work. The number of border crossings didn't drop. All they did was create a humanitarian crisis that we're still dealing with today. Over 1,000 children remain separated from their parents, many of whom were deported without any plan for reunification. That's not just a policy failure, it's a moral failure. And now, with the Laken Riley bill, they're trying to bring back that same playbook. It's another attempt to use cruelty as a deterrent, to scapegoat immigrants while ignoring the systematic problems that actually make communities unsafe. It's easier for them to blame immigrants than to address poverty, inequality, and gun violence. But those are the real issues we need to be tackling if we want to make America safer. Jamie Raskin wasn't afraid to call them out on their hypocrisy. He pointed out how they're so quick to trust the justice system when it comes to immigrants, but claim it's rigged when it convicts Donald Trump of 34 felony counts. You can't have it both ways. Either the system works or it doesn't. But their selective outrage is as transparent as it is ridiculous. The truth is, this bill isn't about safety. It's about fear. It's about distracting you from who's really screwing you over. While they're scapegoating immigrants, they're cutting taxes for billionaires and slashing programs that help working families. They don't care about you. They care about power, plain and simple. Laken Riley's family deserves justice. Everyone does. But this bill doesn't deliver that. It exploits her tragedy without addressing the root causes of crime or protecting anyone. If anything, it makes things worse by perpetuating fear and division. And that's the last thing that we need right now. We have to do better. We have to hold these people accountable for their lies and their failures. We can't let them use fear and hatred to divide us. This isn't just a fight over one bill. It's a fight for the soul of our country. Are we going to be a nation that stands for compassion, fairness, and accountability? Or are we going to let cruelty and division define us? Jamie Raskin showed us what leadership looks like. He stood up to the lies, the hypocrisy, and the fear-mongering. He's reminded us that justice isn't about scapegoating the vulnerable. It's about holding the powerful accountable. That's the kind of leadership that we absolutely need right now. This is our fight, folks. We can't let them win. We can't let them turn America into a nation of fear and cruelty. We have to stand up for what's right. Because if we don't, we're not just letting them define our policies. We're letting them define who we are as a country. And that's something we can't afford to let happen. And that is an absolute fact. Sappers clear the way, airborne all the way.